Good morning and welcome to CNBC Africa for this special live broadcast of the inaugural Very Young Entrepreneur Education and Acceleration Summit. This one-day conference is a new initiative where educators, parents, investors and young entrepreneurs from across Africa will gather to explore the transition from school directly to entrepreneurship. We're now crossing live to the Hilton Hotel in Sandton for the broadcast of the Investors Panel as experts discuss the realities of investing very young.
Thank you so much. My name is Jesse Forrester, and I would like to kick off today by giving an extremely warm welcome to our viewers back home. We are coming to you live from the Hilton Hotel here in Sandton. And being a young entrepreneur myself, I know just how hard it can be to get funding. However, up next, we will take a look at what happens when you invest in a very young entrepreneur. Thank you.
Finding an investment is not easy, and it should not be muchly focused on money. It is a long-term relationship any entrepreneur is supposed to achieve. What any investor needs to look out for from an upcoming entrepreneur is the vision. Is the young entrepreneur passionate about what he or she is doing? Then to the entrepreneurs looking for funding, before you get an investor, does he align with your vision? Do your goals inspire the investor or not? If they don't, then don't just look at the money. My name is Andrew Mpuya, an entrepreneur from Uganda. I'm here to say it starts with you. I founded Yale in 2008, a company that manufactures eco-friendly paper bags. Right now we're producing between 30 to 40 tons of paper bags monthly that we are supplying to the community, and that advocates for the environmental sustainability. 80% of our production is exported to the neighboring countries and beyond, and the 20% we supply to the local market. Becoming an entrepreneur wasn't a nightmare, it was a process. In 2008, I was 16 years old. I was in Form 5. When the government mentioned to ban the plastic bag, I had to think of what could be a viable solution. That's how I came to think of paper bags. I did not have anything to start on, so I decided to collect used plastic bottles. We sold them to a recycling plant. I raised an equivalent of $6, and then I had to borrow the balance from my teacher.
I came to know Andrew when he was 16 years old. He looked serious, very innovative and hardworking. I tried him, and he was honest. He paid back the loan.
Finding investment capital, it was not easy. Along the way, I met many investors, but we could not align in terms of projections, amounts that are supposed to be invested, returns. So it took me time until I had to find the right investor. Being an Anzisha Fellow has changed the way I do my business. You do business knowing that you have someone who is going to help you along the way. I was able to be connected to investors whom I'm able to share the goals with, and I'm able to acquire financing to get machinery. And this has changed output from, let's say, 2 tons a month to 30 and 40 tons. I'm contributing to youth employment by employing youth in production, in sales and marketing. So my approach has been, I get people and I train them, and have trained over 1,000 people. The biggest challenge facing young entrepreneurs in Africa is mentality on how to decide to become an entrepreneur or continue to build yourself into being employed. I've gone through so many challenges. I've come back to zero several times, but I haven't stopped. Many entrepreneurs rush to look for investors, and sometimes they end up making wrong decisions. And don't fear to approach investors, because I've approached over 20, but we have not yet come to an agreement until I met the right person. If you're 15 or 16, it's a very good age to determine your future. There you have time to define whom you can be. So have a vision, to have goals of what you want to achieve, and start small.
I would encourage anyone who has been approached by a young person not to take them as a joke. These young people have great ideas. I could not believe that young man of 16, when I met him, by this time could be owning such a business.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that video. Up next, we're going to have our investor panel, and I would like to kick off by introducing the Executive Director of the Nzisha Prize, Josh Adler, who will be our moderator for today. Round of applause, please. Up next, we will have Eric Osia-Kwan from Chonzo Capital and Angel Fair. He is an investor. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Quickly following is Sawa Nakagawa of Three Impact Investors. She's an advisor to investors. Following which we'll have Mr. Spencer Horn, founder of Cloudline and also a very young entrepreneur. And last but certainly not least, Rapelang Rabana of Rekindle Learning, a young entrepreneur.
So welcome to our viewers on CNBC. My name is Josh Adler from African Leadership Academy, and I've been supporting very young entrepreneurs for a number of years. We're delighted to have you with us. You're joining us at the Very Young Entrepreneur Education and Acceleration Summit, and the idea is to explore entrepreneurship as a career. What does it look like if young Africans transition directly from school and university into entrepreneurship, and what can we all do about that? This panel is about investing. We have investors and entrepreneurs who are either looking for money, have successfully found money, have money, don't have money, I'm not quite sure. And we're going to try and explore this topic a little bit over the next few minutes. We do also have a poll running on CNBC, and essentially it asks a very simple question. Should investors invest more deeply in very young entrepreneurs? Please go onto social media on the hashtag Nzisha Summit and join us with that debate. We look forward to the comments. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. You know, when watching that movie and talking with you guys about things in the build-up for this, I think this is really about trust. So I'm going to start with Rapelang. You managed to attract capital very early. Why were you trusted at 20-something?
Sure, why was I trusted? I think we were about 22 years old. I think, coming out of University of Cape Town. And the big part of us getting trust, I think, was that we had actually spent a good 9 months developing a prototype of the software that we wanted to build. So we had managed to convince our own parents to sort of feed us and clothe us for some time, which again is also a check in the box, and we'd spent 9 months really sitting around a computer with some cheap internet and very crappy laptops, and not having much income, but living like students again to try and make this work. And at the same time, trying to construct the business model of what we wanted to do. And I think that spoke something to investors, that we had come this far with very, very limited resources at that point, and that we had a demo that worked at least 50% of the time, and we could actually show something, and that we could produce something that was comparable to what they were seeing around the world. So that fact that we took action and we started small, like Andrew said in the video, was a big part of cultivating that trust.
So, Spencer, what do you think about this whole trust thing? And I want to go back to school. You went to a school where I think entrepreneurship was encouraged. Maybe connect the dots between school, trust, and being an entrepreneur when you're a little bit older.
Yeah, I think, you know, I attended African Leadership Academy, as you mentioned, which is a place where that entrepreneurial spirit and ability to practice, the chance to practice, really comes into play. And I've had a little bit more difficulty raising funding at the moment. I'm trying to do a little bit of a moonshot project. So sometimes I struggle to wonder, what do I need to do in order to bridge that trust? Yeah, I did an engineering degree, followed a sort of a more trodden path in that regard, and then I went into a corporate job first. And I went in with the belief that I had to do that before I could become an entrepreneur, so that I could get that trust from investors. They had to know that I had the background in fully understanding financial statements and how businesses worked inside and out.
So you need some sort of a badge, like a credential of trust, right?
Exactly. And then you show up and somehow those things still fall short.
So we're going to explore that a little bit, thank you. So let's move on to Sawa. So Sawa actually was part of an institution that tried to invest deeply in the university age space. Maybe you could, let's take the story a little bit further, go to the tertiary education space. How does trust either work or break down between institutional capital and this bridge between high talent?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think one of the challenges is that, as Andrew was saying, when you're a young entrepreneur and you need to communicate that vision, and there isn't a lot perhaps in the beginning to demonstrate to the investors. You may not have a product, you don't have work experience, you may not have significant education compared to other entrepreneurs, older entrepreneurs. So building a trust can be a challenge. How do you know if you're going to be a good entrepreneur without having done all the due diligence? So I think one of the important things perhaps is, if you are an investor that wants to invest in very young entrepreneurs, and that's what this summit is about, we need to ask ourselves, what is the best way of doing a due diligence on these young entrepreneurs? Does it work that we apply the same mindset as a private equity investor, traditional venture capitalist? I think that's a really important question to ask ourselves.
So we're going to come back to that, because I think the answer has to be not the same as it's always been, but I don't know what it is. So Eric, not only are you an investor, but you represent a community of angel investors. What's the problem? Why are we not seeing capital flow to much younger entrepreneurs in your view? And is trust anything to do with it?
Yes, absolutely. It's quite interesting. Building a company is almost like a science. Raising money is an art. So it looks like you have to do two different things at the same time. And it's an art of relationship building. So I tell entrepreneurs, the best time to raise money is when you don't need it. So right now, if there's somebody you want to raise money from and you haven't started your company, this is the time to start building that relationship and building that trust. Because when you show up to somebody, like today, if you show up and you're asking for money, I don't know you. So it's hard. I can have a polite conversation, but it would take time for me to know you and trust you, because at an early stage, we say that people invest in people. The investor is investing in you, not in the business. And there's a very interesting contract there, which is that I'm investing in you, believing that you will make the execution, the business work. So I need to be able to know you enough to come to some conclusion that you can make the business work, or that vision that you've painted to me work, and therefore I need to take a leap of faith in you. Right? And that whole exercise is an exercise around relationships. Okay. And the best time to do that is when you don't need the money, because when you need the money, then desperation sets in. So it's too late.
So, picking up on relationships, I think we'd all agree that one of the most important relationships in a young entrepreneur's life, there are probably two: their parents and their teachers.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a parent, Eric. Yep. I have an engineering student, 19-year-old daughter. She's brilliant. She's on track to become an engineer, build bridges, etc. But she comes home and she says to me, I've got this great idea. Me and 3 friends, we're going to build this business. I'd like all your savings to invest in this business. Right? Yep. What advice do you have for me as the parent?
Right. I would say give them all the savings. Someone says no. No, the reason is that, so in the early stage investing world, we said the first people to invest in you is your family, friends, and then fools, the 3 Fs. Right. The reason why it starts with family is that your family always knows you. They have some sense of, it's all right. Sometimes it goes off a little bit. But so the first people to always invest in you will be your family. Right. And that's why you must always back your kids when they come to you, they want to do something. But here's the problem. You know, your parents, your family always wants you to go on this track, and then suddenly you come back with this track. They're like, what's going on here?
Right.
Right? And then it becomes a challenge because it doesn't mean the family doesn't trust you. It just means that you have gone off a course that they didn't expect you to be on. Right? And this is where the leap of faith comes in, that you as a parent need to start thinking a little bit about, okay, I had this course for my daughter or my son, and he or she has decided to go on this course. You are probably the best person to know whether he or she can execute. And if you can come to that conclusion by yourself, putting everything aside, then you should give up all the savings.
Okay.
Because if you do that, well, not all the savings, but...
Thank you. So, would you echo that view, Sawa? And I mean, you have young children. What's going to happen when they come to you for money for their business?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I probably wouldn't put all my savings either. And I think another important thing is that not every parent has that luxury to be able to invest all your savings to the loved ones. Even if you care about them, you may have to, you have other people to feed and children to school. So I think one of the important episodes also from the video is the role of the teacher.
Yeah.
So I think there was a study.
I was going to say, I'd like to hear about teachers for people who maybe more recently had them.
Absolutely.
So
what
Spencer,
role
what was
did
the
they play?
role of the teacher? And you know, maybe again coming back to education, this transition from school to an entrepreneurial career. How important are they? What happened?
I think because I started my journey once I'd left school completely, the way I frame that, to me, I think the teacher played a huge role in setting that entrepreneurial mindset early on. So I think in the classroom you can get exposed to 2 different mindsets here. And the one is very much the traditional career building mindset, and where everything you do in your schooling is really going towards building that career trajectory. But if the seed has been planted early enough in the classroom setting, that there is a point at which you may want to deviate from that, at which you may want to explore a different opportunity, I think that's absolutely invaluable. Yeah.
So, something that's happening in classrooms and schools across the world, pitch competitions, right? We're now going to all get young people to pitch their idea, etc. I would love to know what you think of them as, I think you're an example of a career entrepreneur.
Sure.
How has this ability to practice pitching helped you secure resources?
I don't know that I'm necessarily one of the biggest fans of pitch competitions per se. I think they've been useful in sort of building some relationships and some exposure, but I can't say that I personally secured significant resources through those. And my worry with pitch competitions really stems from the fact that I don't know that I don't know if it's the right word, they honor the organic process of entrepreneurship, where it's almost too mechanical that you can tell people that you can come on stage and pose this idea and you'll get money without having really traveled the sort of personal journey to really commit to starting this thing, regardless of this pitch competition or not, and really traveling that journey themselves. And I worry that it tries to skip over that in this intense one-weekend boot camp, which isn't realistic. And you find so many of those businesses, even if they do get the winning funds, don't last more than 6 months or a year because they were not an authentic journey. And I worry a bit about that from the pitch competitions.
Does anyone have an alternate view? Does anyone think pitch competitions are great? And similarly, I'm taking the argument of an investor now, like as a preparatory tool before they get to you.
You need to see it as part of a process, not an end in itself. And so that process of learning and going to an accelerated boot camp or going to a hackathon or those things is part of your journey. So once you see it as part of the process, that's the mindset that you must have. Because if you don't have that mindset, you think that, oh, I can just do a pitch competition, win money and get out, then you kind of miss the whole exercise.
Yeah.
So I take the view that it's part of the process, and you, the entrepreneur, must understand where it sits within your own journey. And this is very important because certain entrepreneurs need it to be able to advance to the next level and therefore go through it, and certain entrepreneurs don't need it. It doesn't mean it's not relevant. You must understand what you need at any point in your entrepreneurial journey. And if going to a pitch competition will help you go to the next step, by all means do it. If it's not, then don't just see it as a routine.
So the logical next conversation point from pitch competitions is the role of grant capital, prize money. I assume both of you have either been a recipient of, have you both received grant capital in any way?
The first business I did, we got a grant from one of the DTI programs.
Okay, so yes.
I remember, yes.
And you too, right? Helpful, not helpful for both of you?
It was one of the most tedious processes I've ever done, so I would never take that money again, probably.
So that would be a no. Helpful, not helpful, Spencer?
I agree these can be an absolute time sink, but super helpful to me. I think if you are working in the type of risk venture that really doesn't have a clear outcome, to get you started, to get you past the part that's product risk before you get to market risk, I think that grant capital can be essential. It's what's kept Cloudline going.
And then from maybe the investor perspective, so I think prize competitions that give money, and we run one, and other sorts of grant capital, does it at all color what you're expecting from entrepreneurs having experienced that, if that makes sense? Their conversation with investors is now different because they've experienced money that is maybe less conditional on return.
I see it as what Eric was saying, which is your experience, right? So it's always difficult if you're a first-time entrepreneur to be sitting in front of investors. So if in pitch, for example, that we were speaking about, it's something you can practice. So if you feel like that's something that you're not good at, it's not a really good excuse to say, no, I'm not good at pitching. No, there are so many pitch competitions. You can apply to Anzisha Prize or otherwise. So you should do those things. So I think if you manage to secure grant funding, it's a demonstration of that entrepreneur having had the courage and sort of understanding of himself or herself to go there and put himself or herself out there and got it. I think it's a positive thing for the entrepreneurs, and I don't think it somehow, if you got grant funding, it's not good for the investor. It's good because it's gotten from this stage to that stage where the investors are now able to take market risk, for example, from the product risk. That's a positive thing.
Thank you. So I'm going to take the opportunity to do a quick plug for the Anzisha Prize. Applications are now open. If you're a very young entrepreneur under the age of 22, you can apply at anzishaprize.org. And I think if you're an investor or a mentor or a teacher or a parent and you know a young entrepreneur from anywhere in the continent that is under 22 years of age, please get them to apply for the Anzisha Prize for 2019 today. So coming back,
I just want to say, I think one trick is that we also see entrepreneurs that are going from one competition to another. I think this is perhaps Ratwalan's point also, is that is not the kind of entrepreneur we want to see.
Right.
I think there's a risk in it. The ultimate goal is to build a business, not to be winners of competitions.
Yeah. And I would say that there's it's increasingly easy maybe for philanthropic capital to put together a prize than to maybe do some other aspects of investing.
I also think that
Yes, Eric.
I also think that one of the roles that grant capital plays is, so when you're building in a venture, there's an R&D stage, research and development, right, stage, which sometimes can be tricky to convince investors to put money into. So I think that that's where grant capital plays a very important role. However, you, the entrepreneur, must be clear that sometimes when you get grant funding, you get certain conditions that play on the intellectual property of what you develop. And so the critical thing is that you need to get real lawyers to read that agreement. Because a lot of entrepreneurs take the grant. I don't believe there's anything like free money in the world. So this is very important for you as an entrepreneur to have in the back of your mind. There's no free lunch in this game, right? So the person giving the grant is going to get something out of it. You need to think, what can I give in return for getting that capital? And most of the time, it plays on the intellectual property. And the agreement can be so subtle, and you don't realize it until you build a big business, and suddenly that person owns the intellectual property. And if you don't own the intellectual property of your business, then that's your business gone.
That's great advice, thank you. So I want to move into the funding conversation a little bit, and let's get, not technical, but the various instruments of investing. You know, when you kind of grow up, you know that there's this thing called a loan, and someone has a share in a business, and you can maybe buy some stocks. Then once you start on this entrepreneurial path, there's things called convertible notes and safes, and I think the angel community has gone to town and made it really, really complicated. So someone simplify it for me. What is the simplest menu of instruments that you think teachers should be thinking about and young entrepreneurs should be thinking about in their conversations in and around investing? Who wants to take a stab?
I'll stop there. Okay, I do that for a living. So,
Yes.
so we talk about grant, which is one of the instruments, right? So you've done your R&D, now you now have a sense of the product. Then you now want to sort of build the product. You want to do what we call minimum viable product. In that case, you then go to the family, friends, and fools. You may get the grant from family, you may get it from friends, because friends always know you, right? And then the fools are people like me who don't know you, but kind of take a leap of faith, right? And that instrument is mostly what we call convertible note. The idea is that I am taking a leap of faith in you by saying that, okay, this is kind of like a loan. I'm not sure you can do it. I think you can do it. You say, I can do it. And I say, oh, I'm not sure you can do it. All right, okay, let's meet each other halfway. So I'll give you this money as a loan, and we put an interest rate on it, comparable to the market rate. And then we determine what value the company could be in the future, because we don't know the value now, right? And then because I'm taking the leap of faith, I will get a discount when that time comes for us to put a value on the company. So these are the three instruments that go into a convertible note. So let's say, so I give you $100,000. So you go ahead, you do it. And then over 2-3 years, you realize that, okay, Eric is not such a guy. I want to be involved in my company. You can pay me the loan back based on this interest rates that we put on it.
I'm so glad you went here, because the loans, if I would say on average, are punitive.
Sorry, say that again.
The loan terms are punitive in many convertible notes for early stage.
As can the valuation terms
and can the valuation terms.
Africa.
So I want to turn this over to maybe some of the entrepreneurs. How do you guys feel about this plethora of instruments that get thrust at you in your early 20s?
I genuinely tried to avoid all the complexities and looked at straight equity discussion. Are we getting married or not? And let's commit to that now. And if we're not sure that we want to get married, let's maybe find a way to work on a project or date, but let's just, I don't want to have to think about it every year. Is there a new valuation? How is the interest now? For me, that was a huge complexity at that point in my life.
Okay. Spencer, what do you think about all these things?
I agree with Rappeling. I think keeping it absolutely simple is key so that both parties have an understanding. There's got to be, no one's going to try and mess each other over, that people are coming to it as equal partners. But I think where the discussion often gets stuck is less on the instrument and more on that question of valuation or cap or whatever the case may be that you put into the instrument. And that's where things get really, really sticky. I think in general, in the African market, the entrepreneur has a little bit less bargaining power in that situation, and that's what we see playing out in the market with the valuations here.
So, We have, you know, on TV an audience of, I would argue, business people and investors, and in the room I think it's a significant education audience. What message, pick one, if you had to say you want more responsible capital or I think there's an impact investing agenda that is saying there are young people entering the economy without hope of finding work, entrepreneurship is a viable path. How do we work together to invest in that situation
Josh,
collectively?
If you may, I just wanted to respond to a point you made, which is a very important point. You know, entrepreneurs always have the leverage. Unfortunately, it looks like the investors do, and I will explain to you why the investors do, which is a misconception. Because entrepreneurs wait to raise money at the last minute, desperation sets in, and that's when you lose your bargaining power. Right? But in reality, you have the leverage, which is why it's important for you to build relationships earlier. And I explained that raising money is trust, it's relationship. You have to do it much, much earlier, because when you start raising money at the time when you are not desperate, you have the time, you have the leverage to go into that negotiation. But when you wait to the last minute, that's when you lose the leverage. So you actually have the leverage. Without you, I don't have a job.
That's fair. Very, very quick response to
Yes,
that, Eric.
please, I'm going to throw away the notes.
There's also a very big trend, I can speak to the South African situation, but I believe it's true of Africa in general, of very, very long due diligence periods and deal-making periods. And we're talking months and sometimes years, which would be untenable in markets abroad and can sometimes end up suffocating the very businesses that are meant to benefit from those. So I think there's a balance to be struck there. Is sometimes the entrepreneur is showing up on time, but by the time the money is ready, it's a very different situation. I've been lucky to benefit from grant funding to sort of have a little more patience, but that can be a squeeze. Yeah.
I would like
Okay,
to
no, I'm going to I think there's a belief that capital needs to be more catalytic to the jobs crisis, or responsive, right? As I discussed with many of you before the panel, we're launching a fund, a matching fund concept as an academic institution. The idea is that we don't think investors are going young enough on their own. So essentially, we're going to give people like Spencer a guarantee. We're going to say, we think Spencer is an amazing young leader with potential that has graduated through a particular program. We trust him as a jockey, right? Many young entrepreneurs would have similar sorts of credentials. If he can find an investor that is willing to invest in his business and do whatever due diligence they see as appropriate, we will match that investment up to $50,000. It's a really significant fund, and we're going to announce it formally later today, which is really exciting. I'd like to talk about this. What is the role of catalytic capital? What do you guys think as young entrepreneurs of things like matching, and how do we get more players into the space? For you, is this exciting?
No, it's
for
really
your
exciting.
Angel community? Because now you have to do sub-25-year-old investments.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to start with Rapeleng, and I'm going to come back to you.
I must applaud that initiative. I think it's definitely the way that other more mature markets have gone, where you needed to sort of reignite the VC market or lack thereof. And for me, it speaks to a model that can work, because if you guys are willing to de-risk some of the return that the investor would need to achieve by providing sort of this matching capital, then you reduce the barrier for the risk of the normal commercial investor to sort of come in. And that's really important in a market that is unpredictable, in a profile of entrepreneurs that they don't understand yet. And it's certainly what the government of Israel did do at the beginning of their VC fund 20, 30 years ago, where they as a government conceded, we don't have the skills to do VC, we don't know how to do it, let's de-risk international VCs to come here and do that. And they provided the Yozma Fund, which is a $100 million matching fund, to do the same thing, and very flexible terms to pay that money back. And I really think that in South Africa, we haven't taken enough of that initiative. I feel that the money that has been there to finance young entrepreneurs hasn't been managed enough by people that have understood the value creation process. So it's not enough to be a financier or an engineer, but if you haven't understood that journey yourself, I think you're quite it'll be very difficult to learn how to support an entrepreneur at that stage. And you're probably only well suited to support a business where you can read financials, but what do you read before the financials?
Right.
And we really haven't had, I think, the cohort of investors that can support that stage. So we keep losing money there. And yet we're not willing to say, we should have rather used that money to say, who are the ones that can actually invest early seed, who were basically relying on their due diligence and their vetting, and let's de-risk the process. So
Thank
I like
you.
that.
So, Sawa, coming to you, you advise now investors to be more responsible in their investing. How does the sort of matching capital thing sound to you? And what do you want to see from investors more broadly when it comes to young entrepreneurship?
Sure. I think it's a hugely exciting initiative. I think one of the topics that's being discussed a lot in the impact investing space is this concept of blended finance, which is essentially you have typically philanthropic capital at the bottom, which has the highest risk. And then you have the mid-tier that's willing to perhaps get concessionary returns. And at the top are the commercial investors that are wanting risk-adjusted market returns. So I think you mentioned briefly about the role of grant funding, philanthropic capital. I think what's exciting is the role that you're playing to you say catalytic fund. It should be a catalytic fund, and it should mobilize commercially minded people to go into the seemingly risky space. And I think the other thing that I would want to see is some kind of monitoring and evaluation of what you do and publish the results. Hopefully that would also entice more people to go into this space.
I think you just gave me work.
Okay. And given that you're an academic institution, I think part of the role is to disseminate information and communicate and sort of encourage others to go into the space.
Great. I'm going to come back to you, Spencer, but the angel investor community, I would say it's growing. How do you think we can encourage the angel investor community to take bets on younger entrepreneurs? You represent a whole world of them.
Right.
What can we do?
I mean, what you were doing, providing the first, leap of faith, it gives us a step. It's almost like you put the first step for us to be able to stand on and do what we do. So I think this is really important. In other markets, this is done a little bit differently. For example, even here in South Africa, this government has Section 12J, which allows you to write some, early stage investment against tax, which has really catalyzed the early stage investing community. And Singapore is very interesting. The government gives you 50% back the early stage investing you do when the company fails. So now all global angel investors going to Singapore. So the point is that...
So there's a role to incentives and regulation, right?
It's a big role to incentives, and you as a government need to think about your medium to long-term strategy of enabling SMEs. And so you need to give up something now that allows you to get investors that go into the companies. And so to the point that you made, there is a level of scarcity of capital in the early stage. And so it looks like there are more deals looking for less money. And part of it is that the third party in this game, the government, is not playing that catalytic role by creating the incentives that will unlock local capital. So this is very important for more people to start putting money at risk.
It's fascinating that you noted government there because in the early results of this Twitter poll, which is the stakeholder that most needs to change their attitude should young entrepreneurship as a career be more viable. Policymakers on the public poll earlier today was the most voted for, which I found quite interesting. Parents, teachers, policymakers and investors were the options. So I thought that was interesting to raise. I'm just going to ask one more question on this. Spencer, you will soon be able to go to investors with this note that promises them something. Do you think that's going to help? Short answer.
Yes, I think it will make all the difference. And the key there is it's signaling that bit of trust that you mentioned and that confidence in me. You've done the 10, 11-year due diligence on Spencer, and that's what that note signals. And I can take that to an investor so they can come along. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're going to start to wrap up, and what I wanted everyone to have the opportunity to do, I mean, while we've spoken to, I think, the business and investor community on TV, here we have, I said, a predominantly education audience. So what do each of you have as a message for maybe teachers in schools, particularly in the high school space, around this encouraging the decision of entrepreneurship and maybe better preparing people for receiving capital or other kinds of financial support as they pursue entrepreneurship as a career. We'll start with Rapalang.
Sure. There definitely isn't enough happening, certainly when I was at UCT, to drive entrepreneurship. And I always used to compare it to my friends who started their corporate jobs. You know, they had a graduate internship program, they had a welcome badge and a welcome day to this thing called, a career. And there is no welcome mat for entrepreneurs at all. You just, start this and it's just you yourself and your computer.
Right.
And that could be changed, I think, if universities also position themselves to transition entrepreneurs in their journey to become starting their own business. I mean, there were issues when I was at university around if you started this business while you're at UCT, it's not your IP, and all of these very constraining, restrictive approaches. And these are things that I think maybe universities, they unpacked it, laid it open around how it can support it, how it's not going to be this far-reaching uncle into your business by virtue of you doing that. There's still some issues around that at universities.
Thank you. We're running out of time on TV.
Cool.
Spencer, do you want to add one quick point about school?
I think school and education should bring the basic enablers. And then there's always going to be a self-selecting group of people who go on and become entrepreneurs. But make sure that those basic accounting skills, business skills, the things that especially subsistence entrepreneurs need to begin are in place, and everyone's positioned to take the opportunity if it comes along.
Thank you. So what would your hope be from education as they prepare people for your sector?
Yes, I think given that this is an investor panel, perhaps it's important to bring in the voices of the investors early on. Not as necessarily as investors, but perhaps as mentors, because we all as investors have a role to play in building the pipeline. Somebody has to build a pipeline. We can't just complacently wait. So the schools, educational institutions are a breeding ground for pipeline building. And how can investors contribute skill set, money, and otherwise to help that?
Eric?
I think parents and teachers should still support students when they go off your course onto their own course.
Nice and short, thank you. So to the viewers out there in the audience here, thank you so much for joining us at the Very Young Entrepreneur Education and Acceleration Summit and our investor panel, where we've been exploring entrepreneurship as a career and the role of investors in that story. Back to the studio.